Hey everybody, welcome to the 10th episode of PeopleSoft interview series by PeopleSoft channel. And the question for today is explain the following four actions in the application engine program with examples. So these actions are do select action, do when action, do while, and do until actions. So the interviewer is interested to know whether you understand the concept behind these four actions. He may also give you a scenario whether he has a SQL table with set of rows, and he will ask you that if I write a SQL statement inside toSelect with this example, then how many iterations of that particular toSelect will be executed. So it is important to know that we understand how each of these four actions behave in application engine program, and the interviewer may also ask you the sequence in which these four actions executes in a given application engine program. So in this episode, we will study each of these four actions in detail. We will create a scenario, we will create these four actions, we will write SQL statements and people code, and we will understand how these actions work. So that's the agenda for today, and let's get started. So let's start with the first action, do select. So what is do select action and how does do select work? Consider this scenario where we have step 1 inside application engine program. Inside step 1, the first action we have is a do select action followed by one people code action and one SQL action. So how does do select work? We have written one select SQL statement inside doSelect, and this select statement can return n number of rows. It can be 5 rows, 10 rows, 100 rows, or even 0 rows. So if this select statement returns 100 rows, then the following two actions will be executed 100 times. That means for each single row out of 100, the following two actions will be executed. If the select statement returns 5 rows, the following two actions will be executed 5 times. If the select statement returns 0 rows, then the following two actions will not be executed even once. So that's how doSelect works, and that is why doSelect is used to loop through all the rows in this particular select statement. So if we have a requirement where we need to do something for each and every row written by a particular select statement, we can use doSelect. Let's see one example to understand. So we have this table called employee register table, in which we have 5 employees at the moment, and for all of the 5 employees we have the state status as S. Now we have a requirement to develop an application engine program which will print the name of each and every employee, and after printing the name in the message log, it will update the state status from S to C. So if you see, we have a requirement in which we need to loop through each and every row, because when we will loop through each and every row, only then we will be able to print the name of the employee, and then we can update the state status to C. That's why this example becomes a use case for doSelect statement. So let's create an application engine using doSelect. So let's create an application engine program. Let's add the first action as doSelect, in which we will write a select statement. The second action will be a people code action. This will be used to print the employee name in message log. And third action will be a SQL action. This will be used to update the state status from S to C. So let's write the SQL for doSelect. This is our SQL statement in which we are getting the employee ID and employee name from this employee table. for which the state status is set to S, and we are storing the employee ID, employee name into the state record fields. Now let's go to people code action. Using this message box, we will be able to print the employee name. So it will be welcome followed by employee name. Now let's go to SQL action. This will be our SQL statement to update the state status to C for the particular employee which is present in the state record having state status as S. So let's save this. Let's save the changes and our application engine is ready. Now, if we check the database right now, we are having 5 employees having the state status as S. And we have written a select statement inside doSelect to select the employees with state status as S. So it is expected that these two actions, people code and SQL, should execute 5 times. So let's run our application engine program and test the results. Let's wait for the program to complete. Program is successful and posted. So let's check the details. Let's check the message log. And as expected, one by one, we can see the employee name of all the 5 employees. This happened because doSelect action allowed us to loop through each and every row and then execute the people code action to print the employee name. So if we want to understand how exactly the doSelect execution has happened, let's check the trace files. So let's go to view log trace, and this is the .aet file. So as you can see, our application engine started from here. This was the first doSelect action, and it fetched the employee with employee 1002 and employee X2 Taylor 2. This is exactly the same employee which was printed here. Then after execution of this doSelect, since it returned a row, the next action was people code action, using which we executed the when message functionality to print the employee name, and the following one was a SQL action, and as you can see, one row was affected. So let's query the employee register table one more time. And as we can see, for this particular employee, the state status has been successfully updated to C. So this was the first iteration of doSelect. Similarly, the same thing happened for doSelect iteration 2, iteration 3, iteration 4, and iteration 5. So how many iterations we had? We had 5 iterations because the SQL inside doSelect action returned 5 rows. Now we don't have any row with state status as S because we have updated all the 5 rows. So what will happen if we run the application engine program again? So let's test this. Let's run the application engine program one more time. Let's wait for the program to complete. Program is successful. Let's check the message log, and we cannot see any employee name. So let's check the view log trace and let's check the 85. And as we can see, our program started with the doSelect action to find employees whose state status is S. However, as of now, we do not have any employee because we just updated the state status for all the 5 employees to C. As a result, the doSelect statement did not return any row, and because of that, 0 iterations were performed, or as you can see, no people code action and no SQL action was executed. So this is how doSelect action works. The next action is do when action. So what is do when action and how does it work? So consider this scenario. We have a do when action in which we have written a SQL statement and the do when action is followed by one SQL statement to perform some updates. Now, this SQL inside do when can return any number of rows. It can be 5 rows, 10 rows, 1000 rows, or 0 rows. The way do when works is if the select statement inside the do when returns at least one row, then the following actions will be executed. If the select statement written inside do when does not return any row, then the following actions are not executed. For example, in this employee register table, we have 5 rows, and out of 5 employees, we can see that we have 3 employees whose stage status is S. So we need to create an application engine program which will check if is there any employee whose stage status is still S, and if that is the case, then perform update statement on this table to update the stage status from S to C. So that is the requirement, that if you have at least one employee with stage status S, then perform update on this table. Let's create an application engine program for this case. So let's add our first action, which will be a do when action. This will be our SQL statement for do when. Basically, we are looking for at least one employee who has a stage status of S. And if this happens, the next step should be your SQL action. So this is the SQL for SQL action in which we will update the stage status to C for any employee who has stage status of S. Let's save it. Let's save the application engine. So let's run the application engine program to test the execution of do when action. Program is successful. Now let's check the trace files. And as you can see, we started our program with do when action and it found one row. So as for the functionality, if do when action finds at least one row, then it executes the subsequent action. So this has successfully executed the SQL action and it updated the 3 rows that we just saw which had a stage status of S. Now at this point, all of our employees has a stage status of C. So what will happen if we run the application engine now with the do when action? Let's find out. So we are running the application engine program one more time. Let's wait for the program to complete. The program is successful. Now let's check the AET files. And as you can see, we started with the do when, but this time there was no employee present in the table with stage status as S. That is the reason the subsequent SQL action was not executed. So this is how do when action works. The next action we have is a do while action. So let's consider this scenario. We have one do while action with a select statement written inside it, followed by a SQL statement. So what is the purpose of do while action? The purpose of do while action to create a looping structure in which the subsequent actions will be executed until the select statement written inside do while keeps on providing rows. For example, let's consider this scenario. We are searching for employees whose stage status is S. So it does not matter how many rows it returns. If it returns at least one row, then the following action will be executed. Then again it will check. Again, if it returns at least one row, then the following actions will be executed. Then this will again check. This keep on happening unless this select statement no longer returns rows. So once the select statement inside do while no longer returns the rows, then the entire loop is terminated. Now, how this is different from do select? In do select, if a select statement inside do select returns 100 rows, then we will have 100 iterations of the following subsequent actions. However, in case of do while, it is not the case. It keeps on looping the subsequent actions unless the select statement keep on returning rows. Let's see one example. For example, we have the same employee table and currently all the employee have a state status of S. We have a requirement that we need to perform the update statements which will update the employee in a batch of 3. That means in the first iteration of update, the first 3 employees will be updated. In the next iteration, the subsequent 3 employees will be updated, so on and so forth. This will keep on happening until we have no more employee left with state status as S. So let's see how we can achieve this using do while and SQL actions. So let's add the first action, which will be a do while action. So let's select do while. And this will be our SQL for do while. So basically our do while SQL will check if we have at least one employee who has a state status of S. Next will be a SQL action. So insert action, action would be SQL, and then this will be our SQL for SQL action. Now let's understand what this SQL is doing. It is updating the state status to C for all the employee who has a state status of S. And we are saying order by employee ID and we are fetching the first 3 rows only. That means what will happen is the inner select statement will keep on returning 3 rows at a time and those 3 rows will be updated at this time. So right now we have 5 rows. In the first iteration, 3 rows will be updated and we would be left with 2 rows which are having state status of S. In the second iteration, both of these rows will be updated and we will be left with 0 rows who have a state status of S. So that's the idea behind this SQL. And after the second iteration, this do while will find no longer rows who has a state status of S, and then the loop will be terminated. Let's save the application engine and let's run this application engine to test our results. Let's run the program and let's wait for the program to complete. Program is successful and posted. So now let's check the log file to understand how did do while action got executed. So we started our application engine here. The first action was do while. It searched for employee having state status of S and it found one employee. As a result, it executed this SQL statement which updated successfully 3 rows as we have anticipated. After updating, it again executed do while to check if there any employee with state status as S. It found one, so it executed in the second iteration again the same SQL and it affected 2 rows because we had only 5 rows in the first iteration. 3 rows were updated in the second iteration, 2 rows were updated. Now we are no longer left with any rows with state status as S. That is why the third time when the do while action started executing, it did not find any row with state status as S, and that is the reason this loop was terminated. So this is how do while action works. Now, one very important point to note is that whenever you write a SQL statement inside do while, for example, we written this SQL statement in do while, we should always have one terminating condition which will make sure that At some point, this SQL will no longer return results. And we made sure that as we were updating the state status, we eventually reached a place where we did not have any row with state status as S. If there is no terminating condition provided, then there will be infinite loop in which the do while keep on executing, and eventually the program will fail. And the last action for today is do until action. So let's study and understand how does do until action works. So let's consider this scenario in which we have step 1 in the application engine program. We have couple of actions which are people code and SQL actions, and after this at the end we have this do until action. Now in the previous examples, whether it was do select or do when or do while, we had these actions at the top. However, because each action has a sequence in the application engine program, do until action always comes at the end. That is why in this step we have written do until action at the end. Now, how does do until action works? Let's understand. The system will start executing step 1. People code and SQL action will execute for the first time. After executing them for the first time, the system will execute do until action and check the condition. The do until action has this select statement. It may return some rows or it may not return any row. So how does it work? After executing these actions for the first time, when the system comes into do until, and if this does not return any row, then the loop will continue and we will again come back to people code and SQL actions. This will be executed for the second time. Then the control will go to do until. It will check whether this select statement inside do until returns any rows or not. If it does not return any row, then the loop will continue again for the third time and this people code and SQL action will be executed. Let's say during the third time the do until action executes this select and this select statement returns some rows of data, and that is the time the loop will be broken. So do until works this way. It allows the remaining actions to execute at least once and then it checks the condition. If the select statement does not return any row, then it allows the loop to continue. However, if the select statement returns at least one row, then the loop is terminated. Now, what is the main difference between do while and do until? Because both are looping actions. In do while, the action is at the top. That means we are checking the condition first, and only after the condition is true, we are allowing the subsequent actions to execute. However, in case of do until, the do until action comes at the last. That means we are allowing the precedent actions to execute at least once and then we are checking the condition. That is the main difference between do while and do until actions. So we have created this brand new record called EMP-REG-STG2, and as you can see, as of now, we do not have any data present inside the table. So for testing purpose, we need to insert dummy data inside this table, and we need 50 rows of data. The data can be employee ID 1, employee name ABC1, state status S. Similarly, next row will be employee ID 2, employee name will be ABC2, state status S, so on and so forth. So we need to insert 50 such dummy rows of data into stage table. So let's see how we can create an application engine program using do until to achieve this requirement. So let's create the application engine program. Let's add the first step, and the first action will be a people code action. This will be the people code for the first action. Similarly, let's add a next action which will be a SQL action. And this will be the sequel for the sequel action. After that, let's add a third action, which will be a do until action. And then this will be the sequel for do until action. Now let's understand how these three actions are working with each other. The first action is a people code action in which we are taking the count of records present in the employee register stage 2 table. So we just saw that this is a brand new record and it does not have any row of data. That's why the employee count in this case will be 0. Now, what we are doing is we are increasing the count value by 1. That means we are increasing the count to 1. So in the first iteration, the employee count will be 1. And then we are executing this insert select statement inside our required table. We are passing the employee ID as count in this case, hence employee ID 1. Then we are passing for employee name ABC concatenated with employee count. So the name in this case will be ABC1. And the third value state status as S. So this particular row of data will be inserted into this table using the SQL action. After that, we have do until action. We are checking whether we have an employee ID in this table who has an employee ID of 50. Right now, we have only one row of data with employee ID as 1. Hence, this particular select statement inside do until will not return any row of data. As a result, this loop will be executed and we will be back to people code action. Now, this count star will give you a count of 1 because we have one row of data inserted. Then we will increase the employee count from 1 to 2. So in the second iteration, the employee count will be 2. Now we will perform an insert operation into this table in which we will insert the employee count as an employee ID. So it will be 2, followed by an employee name, which will be ABC concatenated by employee count. So the same way it will be ABC2 and the state status S. Again, the do until action will check whether this table has any employee where the employee ID is 50. Again, we won't have this employee at this point, so this loop will continue. So this way, we will keep on inserting the data until we have an employee 50 present inside the employee register stage 2 table. So this is how do until action will work. Now let's test the result by running this application engine program. Let's run the app engine program and let's wait for the program to complete. Program is successful. Now let's check the details. Let's go to place 5. And as we can see, we started our application engine with the people code action. So we started our application engine here and the first action was a people code action. After that, as we discussed, we performed the SQL action, which is this one, and we inserted this employee ID and we saw that the first row was inserted. So this was during the first iteration. After that, the do until was executed and because it did not find any row, we went ahead and we inserted the second iteration of people code, which is this one. And in the second iteration, we inserted the employee ID 2 with value ABC2 and this row was inserted. This keep on happening. Let me scroll down. So this keep on happening until we inserted a row having employee ID 50 into this particular table. Once we inserted this employee ID, then we perform the do until and check if we have any employee ID present whose employee ID is 50. And finally, we got the data having an employee ID as 50. And that is the reason after 50 iterations, the do until loop was terminated. Similarly, we can verify the execution of application engine by querying this particular table. So let's run this select statement. And as we can see, we have successfully fetched 50 rows of data starting from employee ID 1 to all the way up to employee ID 50. So this is how do until action works. Alright guys, and that's it for today's episode. If this video was helpful to you in understanding do actions, then please hit the like button because it really motivates us to create such PeopleSoft content. See you in the next episode. Thank you.